Greetings, comrades! On September 19th, Russia will hold the next elections to the State Duma. So I was thinking, why not make a video about this? But if you expect this video to be about politics, I am going to disappoint you. There's nothing to discuss here, because United Russia is still the most popular political party, thanks to Vladimir Putin, and they will win. Even the disastrous pension reform hasn't hit their rating that hard. No, today let's talk about how the first elections were held in the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, how parliamentary elections in Russia work in general, what polling stations look like, and what people in Russia do on that day. So first, let me give you a little background. Russia today has a bicameral parliamentary system, with only the lower house, the State Duma, being elected. It is the lower house that is responsible for creating bills, the upper house only approves them. Accordingly, elections to the State Duma are among the two most important elections in the life of the country, along with the presidential election. There are, of course, also various regional elections, but they usually receive relatively little attention and are often combined with the State Duma elections. For example, in the Moscow region on September 19th, people will not only choose the political parties that will get into the State Duma, but also the deputies who will sit in their regional Duma. Some regions will also elect their governors on the same day. But first things first, and we'll start, as always, with some history. When did elections come to Russia in the first place? The State Duma was first established in Russia 116 years ago. Nicholas II did it. A funny fact is that the announcement of the creation of the Duma caused such a violent reaction in society that the first parliamentary elections simply were cancelled. The thing is that the right to vote in the first elections was granted only to special categories of citizens. Very wealthy citizens and ordinary people were very unhappy with this fact. The first actual Duma was convened under a new improved electoral law of December 11, 1905, under which 49% of all voters represented peasants. The election of Duma deputies in Russian Empire was not direct, but through the election of voters. And almost half of the then existing political parties did not agree with this system and boycotted these elections. The first Duma was able to survive for 72 days. Then the emperor simply dissolved it. Well, the first step is always the hardest. However, the second one was no better. The second convocation of the Duma worked for 3.5 months and was dissolved after Prime Minister Stolypin accused 55 deputies of conspiracy against the royal family. And the last, fourth convocation was dissolved by Nicholas II once again, at the end of February 1917, but it refused to be dissolved. Instead, they continued to assemble, effectively organizing the provisional government, which took power away from Nicholas even before the Bolsheviks. So, one successful Duma convocation out of 4. Not bad. With the Bolsheviks coming to power, general elections in the country were discontinued. But not until the 1990s, no. It was only until 1937. Yes, this year is also famous for the fact that the first elections to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR were held. Before that, the highest authority in the USSR was the Congress of Soviets of the USSR, which was made up of the representatives of the Soviets of all republics. Delegates to the All-Union Congress of Soviets were elected at the Republican Congresses of Soviets. However, in 1936, the USSR adopted a new constitution, according to which the Congress of Soviets of the USSR was replaced by the USSR Supreme Soviet. The Supreme Soviet consisted of two equal chambers, the Council of the Union and the Council of Nationalities. The USSR Constitution of 1936 called for elections to be held on an alternative basis. That is, it was assumed that there would be several political parties. However, by mid-1937 this idea had been shelved, because of the rising campaign against saboteurs, spies and counter-revolution, which turned into a mass repression. Many of those who tried to run for the council as alternative candidates were arrested by NKVD, and those who managed to avoid it simply withdrew. As the final note, the USSR law enforcement agencies carried out mass arrests on the eve of the elections. As a result, 461 seats in the Union Council went to the All-Union Communist Party, and another 108 seats were taken by non-partisans. In the Council of Nationalities, there was a similar proportion, 409 and 165. And if it's not obvious already, the non-partisans were also appointed to the Supreme Soviet by the same Communist Party. The turnout is also noteworthy. In 1937 it was 96.5%. Not a very impressive figure, because already in 1946 it was 99.7%. However, Nikita Sergeyevich decided to beat Stalin, and in 1954 was able to reach 100% turnout. Naturally, there was only one party on the ballot and only one candidate for each particular seat. It would have been strange if people from the same party would have fought each other. And as I said, the non-partisans were still chosen by the party, so no contest there either. The elections themselves were very large-scale, and people treated them as a holiday. There were often concerts on voting day, and scarce goods that otherwise could not be found in most stores were sold at the polling stations. But the era of the USSR is over, which means that people in Russia now have some choice, and election day has come to mean a little more, specifically from a political point of view. Let's look at how everything is organized on election days in modern Russia. Parliamentary elections in Russia have never been as unambiguous as in the USSR, or as entertaining as in the Russian Empire. At least, they never ended in riots. However, one should not think that they always ended in a victory for the party of power. Thus, the first Duma elections in 1993 were won by the party of the odious politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky. The next two elections were confidently won by the communists, and only then did the era of United Russia begin. So how do you vote in parliamentary elections in today's Russia? There are a total of 450 people in the lower house of parliament in Russia, who are elected every 5 years. Russian citizens over the age of 21 can run for a seat in the Duma. At the moment, in Russia there is a so-called mixed electoral system, in which both representatives of political parties and representatives of different regions can be in the legislative body. Out of 450 people, 225 are elected to the Duma in accordance with party lists, which means that voters vote not for a particular deputy but for the political party, which then determines the people who will represent it in the Duma in the event of getting the required number of votes. The number of seats in the State Duma of one party is proportional to the votes received. The threshold is 5% of the total number, i.e., only parties with 5% or more of the votes will be represented in parliament. The mandates received by a party are distributed among its members according to the party list, adopted at the party congress. The other half of the seats go to candidates in single-member districts. That is, the entire country is divided into 225 districts, in which individual candidates rather than abstract parties compete against each other. Naturally, in 99% of cases, these candidates are members of this or that political party and use its resources for campaigning. There are no truly independent candidates. Speaking of campaigning, it is also strictly regulated. For example, the day of silence. A day before the voting, any campaigning must be stopped and is considered illegal on that day. When election day comes, every adult citizen of Russia can vote both for political parties in general and for their representatives in one particular district. 14 parties will participate in the elections of 2021. To be eligible for election, a political party must meet one of two conditions: either to be represented in at least one regional parliament or to collect a certain number of voter signatures. This year, all parties chose the first option. Oh, and its leaders should not be in jail. Yes. How does the election procedure itself happen for an ordinary voter? First of all, you must decide whether you want to go to the polling station or vote remotely. If the latter, then you simply go to the Gosuslugi governmental website, log into your account and click in the right places. But the online voting system is only available in 7 regions out of 90 for now. In the rest of the places you have to do everything the old-fashioned way. The most common polling places are usually schools, universities and various cultural institutions. Each resident is strictly tied to a specific polling station near his registered place of residence, and lists of residents at each polling station are prepared in advance. If you want to vote in a place different from the one where you are registered, then you must take care of obtaining a special document allowing you to do this beforehand. And then everything is simple. On the voting day you come to your polling station with your passport. The election commission members find you in the list of the residents of that area, then you sign a special paper that indicates that it is you who came to vote, and you get a voting ballot instead. Usually you get several ballots at once, one for the party and one for the candidates in the individual district, plus several more for voting in regional elections if they are held on the same day. You go to the voting booth where you can think again about what you're even doing with your life, and then to the ballot box.
To the Batmobile!
Of course, the voting itself is anonymous, and the counting does not begin until after the polls close. On election day they are open from 8 am to 8 pm. However, because of the pandemic, the 2021 elections will be unusual. The voting itself will stretch over 3 days. Separately, it is worth mentioning how the authorities are trying to lure people to the polls. In Russia, people are not so eager to go to them, especially young people, so the turnout is extremely low. Pensioners are the most active voters. There is no turnout threshold for an election to be recognized as legitimate, so it will be valid even if only one person shows up. However, the authorities are trying to attract people to the polling stations. In particular, first-time voters are usually given various souvenirs to remember the event. Notepads, pens, etc. At some polling stations they get more creative. Some open field kitchens, buckwheat with stewed meat is delicious. Some have a selfies contests, some have mobile medical centers where you can take a free blood test. Some regions organize concerts after the election day, tickets to which are given to voters only. This is not to mention the fact that public sector employees are practically forced to go to the elections, on pain of losing their jobs. So yeah, now you know all the basic information about the parliamentary elections in Russia. Why would you need it? I don't know. What if someday you move to Russia, get citizenship and come to vote? That's where my video will come in handy.